And now, drum roll please, the real star of this morning's presentation, National Science Foundation Assistant Director for the Directorate for Education and Human Resources, Dr. James Moore. With an annual budget of over $1 billion and personal oversight for nearly 200 employees, Dr. Moore serves as the senior leader for EHR, which supports STEM projects focusing on K-12 education, undergraduate and graduate education, workforce and human resources development, and learning in both informal and formal settings. Prior to his NSF appointment, Dr. Moore served as The Ohio State University's Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, the Chief Diversity Officer, and leader of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Dr. Moore served as a program director for the Broadening Participation in Engineering program at NSF, one of our 2 federal funded grants, which we're so excited about. And during that time, he also helped launch the NSF Includes program, a $100 million plus national broadening participation in STEM initiative. Dr. Moore is nationally recognized for his work on African American males, and he has served on the Ohio State University's faculty since 2002. His research agenda, focusing on education and STEM education in broad areas, is often quoted, featured, and mentioned in such periodicals as New York Magazine, New York Times, Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, and Chronicle of Higher Education, just to name a few. We don't have time to name all of them. Since 2018, he's been cited annually by Education Week as one of the 200 most influential scholars and researchers in the U.S. Pretty impressive. Dr. Moore has co-edited and co-authored 7 books, published over 160 publications, obtained nearly $40 million in grants, contracts, and gifts, and has presented throughout the U.S. and more than 13 other countries. Please join me in giving a warm, appreciative, and in-person welcome to Dr. James Moore.
Good morning. Come on, we can do better than that. I mean, I am so excited to be in your presence. You know, we have been through a lot. The pandemic is a time of loss, literally and figuratively. But science brought us back together. And let's take this moment and cherish it, where we can affirm our humanity and grow and develop in ways that we never thought we could. Sometimes you don't appreciate today until you reflect on where you came from. And so I just want to thank our colleagues from STEMconnector for convening this group. All the right stakeholders to create a disruptive transformation in STEM education and throughout the STEM enterprise. Let's give them a hearty round of applause. It's always great to participate in convenings like this, where you have a combination of industry and individuals from academia, nonprofits, and government. They all play a critical role in, for us, maintaining our global edge in the STEM enterprise. As we all know that all across America, there's talent, but resources and access to the opportunities don't reign in all places around the country. We can think about certain regions of the country, they're very distressed, and in many ways they've been left in ruins. People in these communities are looking to us, they're looking for the government and other entities to care deeply about them, to create a pathway so they can reach their dreams and aspirations. You know, it's hard to engage our beloved democracy if we're not given an opportunity to engage it at the very high level. Unfortunately, there are people in every zip code not extended those opportunities. But something I learned from my mother growing up in South Carolina, working for the Department of Social Services, and it's something that it reigns deeply in my being and it permeates in everything I do. She said, great minds come from every zip code. Certainly, to me, that is fundamental. And that is the basis. And if you believe that, you will realize that no matter how much good work we do, we still need to raise the bar to do even more. Today's meeting has a theme of utmost importance to the National Science Foundation: innovating the future of STEM. And innovating that future requires opening the door for everyone to participate. I'm especially excited to discuss some of our efforts in Education and Human Resources Directorate to address diversity, equity, access, and inclusion in STEM, to also discuss meaningful partnerships and opportunities to support these important endeavors. As the NSF director, Dr. Panchanathan, often says, partnerships allow us to accelerate progress and amplify the benefits at speed and scale. So for today, I'd like to talk with you about two things: who we're missing in STEM and how to reach them. I think if we close our eyes, we already know. And we don't have to go really far to know who those individuals. And oftentimes it's the individuals who are the most educationally vulnerable are not given the same access. But yet still, we're losing young people and individuals throughout the STEM enterprise, even when they go to affluent schools, because the environment is not conducive and they don't feel like they belong. I hear people talking constantly about belonging, but the first thing I always have to tell people, belonging is an outcome measure. You have to create the conditions for someone to feel like they belong. I learned this really quickly growing up in my grandmother's house, because when a visitor came and she extended her hand for you to have a snack or lunch or dinner, our guest got the best china because she was deliberate. To be inviting, it is a deliberate, conscientious act. If we want to invite people to the STEM enterprise, we can't just send an email and say, hey, if you meet this criteria, you have to extend yourself. And you have to tell them about the great wonders that STEM has to offer. Building a capable and thriving workforce of the future will require teaming, collaborations, and partnerships from diverse sectors, including the government, private sector, nonprofits. Any willing vessel that want to be engaged in this evangelistic, noble work, because it's not just a social justice issue. It's an economic and social imperative that we cultivate talent that we traditionally have not cultivated. That brings me to my first point: reaching the missing millions in STEM. As everyone here recognizes, it will require engaging and retaining the untapped domestic talent from underserved, under-resourced communities to advance the frontiers of knowledge and continue our global edge in STEM. In fact, the most recent data from the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics projects that close to 4 million additional people are needed by 2030 for the science and engineering workforce to be representative of the United States. Throughout my career, I have worked to improve education outcomes for educational vulnerable populations. I know this can be done because in my beloved Ohio, work has disappeared. And I'm very happy that Intel has come and created a disruptive transformation in Columbus, Ohio. In turn, the whole country has been turned around. Our industry partners know that there's great importance of cultivating the talent in our beloved country and making those proper investments rather than fleeing overseas. See, it takes, when you think about when Russia launched the Sputnik, even though I wasn't born at that time, but I know quite a lot about it. We didn't have a U.S. Department of Education at that time. education was driven around the Department of Defense. And we had tried in Russia, beat us to the point that was unheard of at that time, and to the point that our Department of Defense made strategic investments. And those strategic investments were played out of the National Defense Act. I'm a school counselor by trainer, and they said, we need to hire more school counselors, and we need to train them so we can get some of the best and brightest and shepherd them, cultivate them for pathways in STEM. Those strategic investments, because in NSF, we don't give funds, we make investments. Corporate America don't give anything, they make investments. My father didn't give me anything, he made investments. Nevertheless, that's a whole nother story. I'm committed to the work that removes these barriers to STEM, that makes STEM learning more accessible and inclusive. That means sometimes providing creative solutions to address some of the grand challenges that we are confronting in STEM. Building an innovative future means that we will need to systematically implement innovations and effective practices throughout the STEM enterprise. Like everyone here today, we at NSF want the nation's workforce to better reflect our population and to welcome diverse thoughts and ideas all throughout the United States. I'm talking about, because I know a little something about this area, I'm talking about regions, distressed regions like Appalachia, distressed regions like the Delta. We're talking about areas like the Black Belt of Alabama, places in many ways that people felt like America has forgotten about them. I'm talking about places like Youngstown, Ohio, Gary, Indiana, Chester, PA. These used to be thriving communities. They were the places that people migrated to from the South because they were the places where land was fertile and the opportunities were great. Like many of you all are very familiar with some of these places, and you see the natural beauty there. But we need to put our foot on the pedal and don't stop on the brakes to create STEM opportunities in these places. Let me be clear, there are communities that we have reached, but not deep or wide enough where it has created a groundswell. So that means we must constantly innovate ways to improve and scale our efforts to another level. I learned in NSF that my budget was about $1.3 billion. I thought that was a lot of money. More money than I ever had under my purview. But I realized the enormity around this. You can name any agency, Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Education. It's not enough money for one agency to take on these grand challenges. Guess what? It's not enough just for the government. It's going to take collaboration, it's going to take teaming, and it's going to take partnering. To make this happen, we have to get out of the mold and be disrupted in our approach to better meet our nation's STEM education and workforce needs. In my mind, STEM is a human right. It's my goal to help people, and I believe in the mission to close the gap for the missing millions in STEM. This is how I honor my mother and those who came before me. Opportunities didn't always reign in their generation in my beloved South Carolina. I could never pay them for the great life that my parents gave me. In a small way, this is how the debt that I'm trying to pay back for the great life that I didn't even have nothing to do with. I had no control over my zip code. I had no control who my parents were. I had no control where I lived. I was given a life. But vocation in Latin means calling. and this is my calling, as I would imagine for many of you in this room. I would do this job for free. In fact, my wife thinks I do it for free. And that brings me to my second point, NSF efforts to establish partnerships. I'm pleased to say that over the years, we partnered with many organizations to move the needle on STEM. That includes, for example, our collaboration with Boeing Corporation, now has an installation in Charleston, South Carolina. 4 years ago, Boeing invested $11 million to accelerate training in critical skill areas to increase diversity in STEM. And $1 million of Boeing investment went to NSF's Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes initiative. So we just renamed Includes after Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. And some of our most recent partnerships include a partnership with the U.S. Department of Education, a partnership with the Doolin Foundation, a historic collaboration with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Smith Futures and Walton Family Foundation, a partnership with Intel Corporation. The Doolin Foundation, which is investing $400,000 in NSF programs that support postdoctoral fellowships and career building activities for women in science. Certainly I have more remarks than I can spend time going over because this is a subject matter that I'm really passionate and committed to talking about. Because I want to make sure that I leave some time for Q&A, I'm going to close my remarks. But before I close my remarks, I believe in my beloved South Carolina, one of the greatest educator of the 20th century. He was born in the same county where my grandmother was born, in Greenwood, South Carolina. And his name is Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. He was the one who mentored and shaped Dr. Martin Luther King. If you ever been to Atlanta, you will see a statue of this individual. And he says, whatever you do it so good that no man or woman dead, alive, or yet to be born can do it better. That's the level of excellence we summon you to, for us to reach the missing millions. I close on that. I stand ready to entertain any questions. Thank you. Now, I'm a professor, and I know how to invade territorial space, and I see muses, and so I just call on people, right? I wouldn't dare do that. I would do it, but not today. I know it's early morning on a Thursday, and it's raining, and
Yep, and we don't do well with rain here in the D.C. area. So when you talk about the missing millions, do you have a count on that and an action plan that we can help you execute?
well, we're still working through that. It was a report called The Missing Millions, and it articulated, and basically in gist, I think that's a metaphor. Of course, there's millions of people who are not being fully cultivated and developed. But I think our plan, action is much of the work that we do around this new directorate called Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. It is going to be transformative, and an example of this is that we're looking for projects that really focus on certain regions of the country. We call them certain regions of the country that we can create synergies that foster and cultivate new industries. And so these projects will be up to $160 million. That's unprecedented in NSF. The biggest, what I hear when I was in the community is that most institutions, we become so dependent on soft money that it's hard to integrate some of these exemplary practices. And so when I was talking about the budget and the importance of these partnerships, is because industry is making investment, but we all make an investment, but we're not necessarily making an investment in a strategic way, in a collaborative way. And so I think some of the programs and the things that we outline will give us a better opportunity to create the groundswell. Yes, we do have a strategic plan at the National Science Foundation. My directorate, not that we own education and workforce development, but a major part of that work is within the Education and Human Resource Directorate. To give you an example of the portfolio, I know that many of you all are focused on K-12. There are programs that focus on called the noise, where you can develop and train individuals to be teachers in STEM. And it could be at the undergraduate level, it could be at the master's level. And not only that, we have grants that while you're a teacher, you can get a supplement. And I know in some of these areas where the missing millions are, teachers are not being paid, compensated at levels. In fact, I read about, and I've met some of those teachers, some tell me that they're on welfare while working, right? To me, that's appalling, and it saddens me to hear that the people who's going to cultivate the talent. The other piece is we have programs. We just had our PI meeting. It's called STEM. Individuals can submit projects where they can fund students to complete their associate, undergraduate, and master's degrees. And I met some of those students maybe 3 weeks ago, and they were from Miami-Dade Community College in the Miami area. And several of them said, I would not be able to pursue my physics degree or my biology degree if I didn't have the scholarship. As a person who works in higher education, I'm very concerned about the cost of higher education. It's going up 6% annually, higher than the inflation rate. And so many students will foreclose on a college education in general, and some will foreclose on a STEM degree because a STEM degree typically costs more than a non-STEM degree when you think about the fees and et cetera. These are issues that NSF is keenly aware of, and the CHIPS and Science Act outlines some things, and everyone calls and want to meet with me, but I'm learning, because this is my 6th week, because it's it's been authorized in the legislation, does not mean that we jump to maximum levels, like I was jumping to maximum levels until the money is appropriated. But regardless, the mission is still there. Whether it's appropriated or not, we got to figure out how we can reach the missing millions, and we got to be creative and innovative, just like we asking our community to be creative and innovative. How do we leverage the dollars that we have? So this is to make a long story short, we do have a strategic plan. We haven't outlined totally what the manifestations of all those partnerships, but we do have in my unit a senior advisor that focuses on partnerships. And because I'm not going to be able to reach the missing millions just with 1.3 billion. And I didn't tell you, the 1.3 billion is not, 1 billion of it is almost already congressionally mandated. So I can't do anything for that. So thank you.
So I have a question. When you think about strategic partnerships and reaching that missing million, I always wonder, I work with TRIO programs, College Access Success programs. We're in high schools and community-based organizations, which, may not be touched relative to, the higher ed community, but the students are going into college, okay? And they're being tracked, in addition to the college, TRIO programs as well. Has there been any consideration, or is that something that, may be possible in the future, to consider how TRIO programs that are in all of the states, serving, those individuals who are underrepresented, low-income backgrounds, how they can be incorporated in some type of strategy with NSF as partners throughout, any possible grant opportunities, or just in terms of considerations for the future to increase that, STEM possibilities?
Well, I think you asked a wonderful question. It's the question that I've been asking because I was the PI. I just received, before I had to let it go once I came to NSF, a little over $4 million for TRIO. The sad thing about TRIO, if you talk about the TRIO suite, they're reaching less than 1 million kids. So they don't even come close to, certainly there's some things that we should be thinking about how we can collaborate. So I'm excited. I met the deputy via Zoom, and I'm glad to hear about the announcement in the U.S. Department of Education, and all of the agencies need to play a role. And so when I think about partnerships, the Ronald McNair, another great South Carolinian, that program, I always think, wonder what that would look like if it was primarily a STEM focus. The manifestation of research and is a little different from being someone like me in social science. So I am reaching out to our colleagues in different agencies to find out what are those common areas. In fact, I'm chairing one of the committees, co-chairing one of the committees, which it comprises all the different federal agencies. And what we talk about is what we're doing around advancing STEM education. So I think that's a great question. The question that I don't want to do is replicate. What I would like to do is pool and leverage our human and financial capital so we can take things to scale. It's so easy, and that's the thing that frustrated me about higher education. Especially being at my beloved Ohio State, is so big. It's like a big, cruise ship, and it doesn't pivot really well, right? And so we have so much duplication, but some you're going to have it at places, but I always wonder if we work together, how more impactful we could be. And I'm saying this because I'm controlling my own personal urges. I like to reference myself. I was an independent contractor at the university, and we have our own research enterprise. But it became very abundantly clear that you're not going to be able to reach all of these people. Yeah, and people say reach one, each one. I don't like that no more, right? Because you ain't reaching enough, right? And who gets to decide who that other one? It's like the star. I don't know if you know the starfish kind of parable that somebody was observing this individual just throwing starfish back in the ocean, and it was literally just say thousands. And someone was watching and said, and they went up to this individual and said, well, why are you doing this? And he basically said it mattered to that one, right? But still, in my mind, but what about all the others? And I love learning about what you all are doing because I think it represents the ethos of what NSF Includes represent. It's about networks. And what I know about some of these distressed communities, they oftentimes operate in isolation. They're by themselves. You might be the only certified or licensed chemistry teacher in the school, or the only calculus. I mean, we have malpractice going on across America that even when sometimes our young people, and I notice in my own research, that sometimes I realize in my research that all AP is not created equally, right? Young people would come to Ohio State and say, I took everything I had to offer, and it seemed like it wasn't enough. And we see ourselves as the premier STEM agency in the federal government, perhaps in the world. In fact, there are delegations. And we have to really lean into the issues that are plaguing K-12 around STEM. And I can tell you that's going to be one of the areas under my administration, what that's going to look like. But I know most importantly, being a former teacher, when I ask people why they went in STEM, it's because they had an outstanding teacher. That teacher plays a role. Even when that teacher might have been hard, but that teacher played a role. More so than all the other things that what people say. So we got to get some of the best teachers in the classrooms, and we got to support them so they can take things to scale. We also have to fund and find ways in which we can build capacity of those emerging and developing institutions of higher learning because there's talent there. When I think about where the diversity exists in this country, they're in the places that have the highest poverty rates in America. And so it's not that they need less, they need more, but it needs to be cultivated and it needs to be coordinated. And I was glad that our colleague talked about being a backbone. Let me just say, what Janine presented to you all, I hope that you overwhelm her email, because that is a resource that even at Ohio State we don't always have. So I just wanted you to think, even at institutions that you might think is the land of resources, this is a resource. Let me just say one more thing, and I'll take one more question because I don't want to take any more time. It's 100% chance you will not get awarded an NSF grant if you don't what? I think we all smart. Everybody get an A. If you don't apply, you won't even have the 20%. Right? You want, just try. There's utility in practice. Try to be a reviewer. Reach out to a program officer. Tell them what you're trying to do. If you don't have all the ideas, they'll talk to you. Because it is our job to make investments in PIs who can realize NSF strategic priorities. Period. One more question, then I'll sneak off.
Hey, so kind of looking back at your time as a researcher in PI and kind of looking forward to your role at NSF, there was a lot of conversation yesterday about like moving away from these pockets of innovation and how we provide opportunity. So I was just curious, your thoughts on like translating research into practice and kind of sharing the good stuff going on out there.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, a person who did a lot of in-service training with teachers, and not to mean the stereotype, I mean, I've been all around the country, actually in the world. Teachers don't have time to read, you know, robust research method. I'm not saying that they don't have the capability. They just want me to tell them what to do, right? And so one of the big critiques, and our National Science Board interviewed teachers, and they shared this with me, is the translation. And I've talked to my colleagues in our division. I said we need to think about ways in which we can translate and make everything palatable where people can respond. We even thinking about how do we connect this work in ways to create networks. If you're in a school district, all school districts don't have the same resources. Is there a way that we can do shared lesson plans, curricula in ways that are developed by the federal government? You know, now, as you know, that the federal government now requires that all research studies and data sets now have to be publicly available. Maybe we need to think about ways in which people, when they create these artifacts, if you will, in which they're accessible to others. But the other thing is, I know the U.S. Department of Education has equity centers in every region, even though they don't focus totally on STEM. Are there ways to leverage that in a shared partnership for those individuals because they have relationships? Because I'm a product of an 1890 and an 1860 land-grant universities, there's already a built-in apparatus in rural and urban communities called extension. Is there a way to leverage that? Because, in fact, they have relationships with those communities in ways that someone like me may not. Is there a way that we can think about leveraging these things that we've already made investments in? What I do, part of what I do, I'm Socratic method, I ask a lot of questions. And sometimes my staff looking at me, I told you the answer. I said, I ask everybody the same question because I want to see what people's response is to the questions. and to see what is the path forward. The other piece is what I want, that I'm pushing, but I'm in that 6 weeks, so you can't push but so hard, is that I want some of my program officers to get out in the community. I want them to see what is going on, real time. See, it's a whole lot different when, I take my students to some of the urban schools in Ohio. It's a whole lot different when you go in there and you see what's going on, and you see the challenges, or you see the neighborhoods that they got to walk through that is filled with violence and crime, and how that's trauma. It's a whole lot different when you go to Appalachia, when you have the school and the kids they have to ride the bus 40 minutes to get to the school, right? And some of them don't have, the nutrition, or they can't afford glasses. It changes you, but it motivates you when they hear how our investments are making a difference in those communities. And so I think those are the things that we want. We need to be constantly engaged with the community. So NSF won't become so ivory tower like institutions of higher learning can be. So we're working on that. I promise you. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. You'll hear more about that. But what when you take on a noble charge, that it seems like you can't do anything, some people are going to sit on the sidelines because they're going to say, we tried that, it's not going to work. You got to have some wins, and I think the wins is when our people go out and see the benefits. It's like if the teachers, when my students come back and they tell me how well they're doing, you feel like you get motivated. Maybe my teaching wasn't too bad, or they see in a small way that you played a small role in their success. It makes you become more motivated. And so I close on that, and I'm just thankful for this opportunity. I stand ready for invitations if I can be of any assistance to you in the work that you do. I'm all in. Education and human resources is all in. It's not about us. It's not about, I try to tell the staff, it's not about us. If we think it's hard, go to some of these communities and listen to them, and we'll learn what real hardness, what a tough life is that you have a dream, but you don't really have a mechanism to realize your dream. And so I thank everyone for what you do, and thank you for extending this opportunity.